الله أكبر الله أكبر.
All right, so today we are going to dive into a question that I think anyone who's ever read the Quran has probably asked themselves at some point. Why are the stories all chopped up and scattered around? You know, if you've ever felt like you're on a scavenger hunt, jumping between chapters to piece a story together, you are definitely not alone. And it turns out there's a pretty brilliant reason for it.
I mean, seriously, have you ever been reading the story of Adam, or Moses, or Abraham, and you get this feeling of déjà vu, thinking, wait a minute, didn't I just read a different part of this story in a completely different section? It can feel a little confusing, right? But what if I told you that this scattered structure isn't a bug, but an incredibly sophisticated feature?
You see, the way these stories are spread out is actually a deliberate and really clever literary device. It's not random at all. The Quran isn't trying to be a history book, laying out events from A to B in perfect chronological order. No, it's doing something much, much different.
So let's just lay out what you've probably already noticed. The stories are broken up into pieces across different chapters or surahs. They definitely don't follow a simple timeline. A lot of times, key details seem to be missing. And you might even see the same story pop up again later with slightly different wording. And these aren't mistakes, they're actually clues to a much deeper purpose. And that right there brings us to the absolute heart of the matter. In the Quran, the purpose of telling a story is almost never just about the story itself. The story is a tool, it's a vehicle being used to accomplish a much bigger goal within each chapter.
Probably the best way to wrap your head around this is to think of each piece of a story as a case study. You know, just like in a business textbook where they give you a real-world example to help you understand a big concept, the Quran does the exact same thing. It drops a piece of a story in a specific place to perfectly illustrate the main theme of that chapter. So the story is always serving the theme, not the other way around. That's the key.
So, here's the basic formula. First, every surah, every chapter has its own unique vibe, a central theme or message. Then, a story, or just a tiny snippet of one, is brought in as the evidence, as the perfect example. And here's the cool part. The only details from that story that get mentioned are the ones that directly support the lesson of that chapter. Anything that's not relevant to the theme, it just gets left out. It's incredibly efficient.
This quote really just says it all, doesn't it? The story is the vehicle, not the final destination. The lesson is the destination. And once you really get that, honestly, the entire structure of the Quran just clicks into place. It all starts to make perfect sense.
Okay, so that's the theory. But theory is one thing. Seeing it in action is where it gets really exciting. So let's look at a few examples that just beautifully show how this case study method works in practice. Let's start with a really cool little puzzle from the story of Zechariah in the Bible. So he asks God for a sign that he and his wife will have a son in their old age. God gives him a sign, but the description of that sign is slightly different in two different chapters.
Now look at this. At first glance, it almost looks like a contradiction, right? In the chapter Al-Imran, the sign is that he won't be able to speak for 3 days. But over in the chapter Maryam, it says 3 nights. So which is it? Is this an error? No way. The answer is hidden in the theme of each chapter. Let's break this down because this is amazing. The theme of Surah Al-Imran is all about light and bringing hidden truths out into the open. So the word days, which we associate with light, is the perfect choice. But Surah Maryam opens with themes of darkness, of praying in secret, the despair of old age before hope arrives. So here the word nights fits the mood perfectly. It's not a contradiction, it's a deliberate, masterful literary choice to serve the theme.
Okay, let's look at another one. Sometimes a story is revealed for a very specific purpose, to mentally and psychologically prepare the community for something huge that's about to happen. A perfect example of this is the story of Taloot, or King Saul, which was revealed right before the Muslims' very first major battle.
I mean, just look at these parallels, they're incredible. Right before their first big battle at Badr, the early Muslims were outnumbered 3-1. They were terrified. And at that exact moment, the Quran reveals the story of Talut's tiny army facing the giant Goliath. In both cases, there was arguing and questioning of leadership from within their own ranks. And in both cases, the small, faithful group won against all possible odds. This wasn't just a history lesson. It was God giving them a blueprint for victory and a massive dose of courage.
And can you imagine hearing this line from that ancient story right before you march into your own impossible battle? How often has a small company overcome a large company by permission of Allah? It was a direct message, a divine reassurance sent through time to tell them that armies aren't won by numbers, but by faith and by patience. The story was cited because its lesson was needed right then and there.
Okay, so what about the story of Joseph or Yusuf? This one's a bit of an exception, right? It's pretty much the most complete chronological story in the whole Quran, told almost entirely in one chapter. But even here, with this beautiful linear narrative, the purpose still isn't just the story itself. It too is serving a much higher thematic purpose.
You have to understand when this story was revealed. It came down during one of the hardest times for the Prophet Muhammad when he was being rejected in Mecca, and the parallels are just heartbreakingly clear. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, the Prophet was betrayed by his own tribe. Joseph was exiled from his home, the Prophet was eventually exiled from his. So the story's ending, where Joseph not only becomes victorious but also forgives his brothers, was essentially a prophecy for the Prophet. It was a message saying, be patient, your story will end the same way. Victory and forgiveness are on the horizon. It was both a prediction and a deep personal comfort.
So once you see this, once you understand this principle, it really does change everything about how you read the text. Your whole perspective shifts. You go from being a passive reader, just following a plot, to an active explorer looking for connections.
We have to change the question we ask when we're reading. We need to move from, okay, what happened next, to the much more powerful question, why is this part of the story being told right here, in this specific chapter? That mental shift, that act of deep reflection and pondering, is a core concept in Islamic tradition called Tadabbur.
So here's the takeaway. The next time you come across a story in the Quran, any story, just pause for a second. Ask yourself that one question. What's the link? What's the connection between this narrative case study and the main theme of the chapter it's in? Because when you start doing that, you're not just reading stories anymore. You're engaging with this incredibly layered, masterfully woven text, and every single piece will start to reveal a whole new world of meaning.